Yeah, very good. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Backline User Group Friday Lunch and Learn series. We're just doing a second part today. Some of you who didn't attend the first part, a quick introduction here about myself, my company. My name is Thiagu Palaniappan, and thanks for the Bug team for allowing us to present today. I'm a mechanical engineer, have been using the PTC solutions Creo Windchill for the last 24 years. I started with revision 16 back in 96, 97 timeframe. And currently it's Creo 7, as you know, the latest one. The topic here is mainly for any users, right? It could be, some of you may be experienced, some of you may be new. I just put together a few tips and tricks. I call it general tips and tricks, things that I've seen. It's been there for a long time. Some of them are recently introduced. Some of them have been there for a long time that some of our customers were not aware of. When I'm doing consulting with them, I've seen it. So I just put together here that should hopefully help you all. So we did the part one about a month or two ago, if I remember correctly, and we kind of ran out of time. So I would like to just continue with that. And I'll do a quick overview initially, right, on that first part, and then we'll jump into the part two topics that we couldn't complete last time. And I'm sure there might be a recording that Deb could potentially share. If some of you didn't attend the first meeting, you could possibly go watch it again. I'm pretty sure that could be made available. So those are not familiar with TriStar, real quick here. We are the largest value-added reseller for PTC products. We are headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm based out of the Chicago west suburb here in Chicago, but we do have our team spread across the United States and Canada, right? We have been in business close to 25 years, mainly helping out customers with CAD, PLM, product development, right? Areas with Windchill implementations, Creo training, simulation, etc., right? Fully aligned to the PTC products, as well as we offer some custom solutions as well. So it's a quick intro about our company, if you're not familiar with. And then moving on to the agenda here, this is what I had in the last time in part one. Regardless of what release of Creo you're using, some of you may be using Creo 7, some of you may be on 4, right? Creo 4 or Creo 3, or maybe 5 or 6. Or I don't know if any of you are still using any of the Wildfire releases. Many of the things I'm going to show you are applicable. I would say release agnostic. So it could work across the board in many of the old releases as well that I'm going to talk about. So I think last time we covered a good part of like the sketcher and a little bit of part modeling with intent chain, and that's kind of where we ran out of time. So I want to go a little bit beyond that too this time. As for just to review, this is some of these I went through last time. The way I do these presentations, I show a slide and then I jump to Creo and show you an example, and that's kind of, so it's helpful for you. But I'll just run through I'll take a quick minute here to go over what we kind of covered last time in the part one session. And like I said, feel free to go check out the recording. I'm sure it's available. It could be made available that we did last time on the first part. So we talked about the importance of Sketcher palette and how it could be customized using the config.pro 2D palette path. Very helpful. So you're not reinventing the wheel every time. Any sections or sketches that you would be using across the enterprise again and again, you should be customizing the Sketcher palette, right? We showed you some examples last time. We talked about it. And the importance of replace, if you remember, we talked about how huge replace is. When it comes to making design changes, it could be a base feature that you're going to make a change. It's a good practice to always replace, so the feature ID, or I should say the geometry ID, remains the same, so that when you make that change, the features that are referencing that geometry, it doesn't fail, right? So just trying to make your models more robust, right? It's all math driven, as you know. Everything in Creo has an ID, right? A vertex has an ID. A line or an edge as an ID, a surface as an ID, right? Pretty much, if you think about a cube, every single, if you look at all the vertices, the surfaces, they all have an ID, including the feature, right? So my point is you should be able to just keep that ID the same as much as possible. The advantage of keeping the ID the same as much as possible is it wouldn't fail in the future. Just like an example here where I could replace that line with an arc or multiple lines, and we went through some examples on that. So, and then there was also a replace in the part mode where I should be able to quickly replace the flat surface or any surface, like I've used it during my industry days, wherein I would replace a sliver surface in a casting, for example, with another quilt. And here you could see how, if I could zoom in here, there are quite a lot of ways of handling this situation here. But if I want to make this geometry flush with this, an easy way is to just copy paste that surface and then just say, I want you to offset the surface, but then use replace. Many of you might remember it used to be the tweak replace back in the days, the good old days of Pro Engineer, and now it's the offset tool where I could say replace that with this, and it'll just as you can see, it confirms to that geometry there, right? So, and then some of the Sketcher constraints best practices. If you think about it, right? I mean, we've been through all this last time, but I thought I should quickly review these before we get into today's topics. It's a good practice to always use the right mouse button or use a mini toolbar as much as possible while you're in sketch mode. And many times, and the software tries to assume its own constraints, as you know. If you try using the shift key and hold down the shift and then start sketching, the system doesn't assume constraints. Or you could use a right mouse click toggle that allows you to, remove the constraint temporarily. Maybe you don't want it to be vertical, but you want it to be parallel to something or equal to something else, for example, right? You could switch between multiple constraints using the tab key, and holding down the control and then selecting a vertex allows you to extend. All these are nothing new in Creo 7. It's been there since the good old Wildfire days, the Pro Engineer days, right? That's kind of useful, I think, and I've seen many customers are not aware. Some of you may be aware of this, some of you may not be aware. I thought all this should help, right? And then this is something most of you may be aware, wherein when you bring in a sketch, or even if you have an existing sketch, you would like to quickly, scale or rotate or resize. You could use a scale, rotate, resize from the mini toolbar. It allows you to change the origin using the right mouse drag, left drag to move, etc. Right. So all these we kind of covered. We went through a few config options too that I personally like. Sketcher refit after dim modify. PTC keeps changing the default with each release. I know with the Creo 7, they set it back to no. Yeah, sometimes you might wish your Sketcher refits. Sometimes you might wish the Sketcher doesn't refit. It depends on where you are, right? I probably am zoomed in here all the way, and I don't want you to zoom out every time just because I made a simple dimensional change. I'm still working on that area. So you could either set it to yes or no. And speaking about config, this is something you might want to add in your favorite. I don't know if some of you may be aware of it. Instead of going to your tools options, file options, and going to the config.pro every time in editing, it'll be nice to add them as a favorite. And if you see under favorites, all your commonly used configs, your favorites will be shown up here, and you can toggle them on and off. And we talked about the difference between what happens if you have this lightning bolt or the screen or the magic wand. Depending on that, right, you will if you change that option, the system may have to be you may have to restart Creo with the screen. If it's a wand, that means the option will take effect for the next object that you create. It won't be retroactive to the previous object. If it's a lightning, it takes effect immediately, right? So as you can see here, the Sketcher refit after dim modify is something I'd like to turn on and off. So that's why I add that as a favorite. Right? So we talked about how commonly used configs you could add to your favorite, right? Maybe I might have a custom hole profile for my holes, right? When I create the hole feature, different hole paths in there, and I might want to switch that with a map key maybe. All these could be, if it's part of the config, you should be able to add to your favorites here, right? And then we talked about the advantage of lock scale. It's an old one, very old. It's been there forever in Creo.
There was a question on the last slide.
Yeah, sure. Okay. What is it? Let me just see if I can look at the chat set here.
At the favorites, turn on off different search paths and affect the session.
That's a very good question. You're not turning on and off a search path, so that's a very good question. So the answer is no. The search path, it's not an on and off, right? The on and off is mainly for if the value of the config option is yes or no, right? Only then you can turn it on and off. So for example, multiple skeletons allowed. When I do top-down design, the value for this is yes or no. That's what you can turn them on and off. But the search path like this, right, whole parameter file path, or even your search path, if you use multiple folders and network drives to manage your files, it's just highlighting. You can maybe change the path, browse and manually change it, but you're not able to turn it on and off. Hopefully that makes sense. Are there any other questions on that? So moving on here. The lock scale, this is another thing that I've seen ever since Creo has been there. This lock scale was there, wherein you're able to change, I would say do a proportional update on your initial sketch, right? Rather than trying to change one by one, if you grab all of the dimensions that you're trying to modify and then hit this little lock scale, it helps you. Again, we went through several examples last time. I know I want to spend more time on the new topics we didn't get to last time. So that lock scale is very beneficial, wherein it'll maintain the proportion of these rather than, making the sketch too long or too tiny, depending on, if you change one or two dimensions. So it's supposed to be a good practice too, when you change dimensions. And a couple of additional configs like Sketcher Lock, Modify Dim, Sketcher Dimension Auto Lock. All these are also going to be quite helpful. Sometimes, you don't want to do an accidental change while dragging your entities. So at that time, I prefer locking the dimensions. Now, is there a way to automatically do that? Absolutely. You can say Sketcher Dimension Auto Lock, right? So that as soon as you create a strong dimension, it will automatically lock. Or if you modify a dimension, it'll automatically lock, right? So weak, strong. There's a weak dimension, strong dimension. There's a lock dimension, right? 3 different areas or 3 dimension types. And once you apply your design intent, sometimes you don't want that to be accidentally changed. We talked about that. And then a few things in the Sketcher we talked about was the new things PTC introduced in Creo 5.0 with Sketch Region. You no longer have to actually trim your sketched entities, have a closed shape like back in the days. You could just have an existing boundary or an existing edge, and you don't have to. You could have multiple sketches like this, right? And you just hit Shift G in your keyboard, and that will take you to Sketch Region, right? There's a filter there. That allows you to go and select sketch regions, and then I could just go extrude them or create a fill surface or revolve them, etc. Something that they introduced in Creo 5.0. Right? So what is happening behind the scenes is it's automatically projecting that for you as an internal sketch, right? In the past, we had to manually do some construction geometry, had to trim and all that, and have to have that closed sketch. But now the system identifies them as regions. So I could select this as a region, that's a region, this is a region. I can just drag a window and then select multiple regions and then extrude them, right? So a different workflow, maybe if you use skeletons and multiple sketches, right? It's a good practice not to obviously have a complicated sketch, right? You typically do feature-based modeling, but it will be helpful, I think, where you don't longer have to spend as much time as you used to trim those sketches and curves like before, right? And then you also have before we get into the new topics, sometimes I've had customers tell me that when they bring in, DXF or DWG files in their Sketcher, right? Sketcher allows you to import Adobe Illustrator files, DWG, DXF, all that, right? When you import them, sometimes the system crashes or it's unable to import or you just get a blank screen. The reason for that is the system is trying to apply constraints and dimensions at the same time. So how do you avoid that, right? How would you avoid it doing that? One is just by unchecking those. It's a simple thing, right? You just uncheck those so it brings in the geometry and then you apply it. I've had this quite a few times, especially with much more complex geometry. And it's not complex, it's just like a logo or something for my model here. It's a simple, not a lot of splines in here, but when you especially have very complex geometry that you're trying to import, it's trying to calculate using the intent manager, and that might cause some issues, right? This here is a little old school versus new school option. We're all used to, those are experienced. All of you remember this familiar sketching plane, orientation plane. orientation collector, right? We still have it. But starting Creo 2.0, PTC allows you to do those using the right mouse click. Not sure if you've tried it. You can go right click while in Sketcher orientation, section orientation, and then you can just select your references really quickly there. So, we talked about known dimensions that could be added to controlling relations. We talked about, where I would use the fillet versus the round feature, right? I would shy away from, as a good practice, you should be creating round as a feature rather than including it in the sketch. Then why do we have the fillet command instead of the sketch? For situations like this, where manufacturing you might want to show for manufacturing the bend radii, the vertical sharp. For a sweep, yes. For that trajectory, yes, I would like to have that as a fillet. But is it a good practice to create an extrude with these sketches in there, right? A better practice might be to extrude it, then do it as a round using intent chain. Speaking about intent chain, this is where we left off last time. If I remember correctly, that's where we wrapped up, I think, where it's a good practice to always select concepts or intent chains. It could be edges or surfaces. So when you make changes, right, the IDs, the geometry IDs are not going to be affected, right? I'm selecting this as a concept, right? I'm selecting all these edges in here so that it's an intent chain, as you can see. So even if I make any change to that geometry, right, as you can see, the software adapts, it knows to update the intent chain as required. Normally, I've seen many users would do this using the control key. You grab one edge, each edge has an ID, and that's where the problem happens, right? Whenever the ID changes, your feature fails, and then you spend some time, and depending on how complex the model is, right, you're going to spend some time fixing those failures, which you may be already good at fixing, but it's more like these are some good modeling best practices, right? Whenever possible, try to use intent chain there. Right? That's a good practice there. It works greatly for drafts and rounds, right? Okay, so that's kind of where we left off last time, I think, and maybe I'll start going through the rest of it here. That's where we ran out of time, if I remember correctly. We didn't get through everything. I want to get to a little bit of assembly and some more part modeling topics here. The edit references and missing references is something that, again, in Creo 3, many of you might have noticed it. Finally, Creo does show if anything is missing, right? You might have seen that. If you have a very old legacy design that was done prior to Creo 3, remember to regenerate it once, and then it'll start displaying, right? So sometimes you might see that, okay, you run into a failure mode, but it doesn't show or highlight the references. The main reason is it might be a model done and last saved in Creo 2.0. You're just using it in your assembly, but then it was never regenerated since Creo 3.0, right? So you have to do that. Then it'll highlight, right? When you go to missing reference, either from the reference viewer or from your collector, right? It'll have this little red dot, and then it should highlight your old reference, which is very useful, right? Before we had to go to the backup model and all sorts of workarounds, but now it's nice that it highlights that. Okay, so I want to spend some time on do a demonstration of a few of these in here. This is something that comes up a lot during my customer interactions as to in Creo, there are so many little tips and tricks here. Sometimes you got to use a control key, sometimes a shift. And there's a variety of areas where we could be using it and potentially, leveraging that just to speed up your design process. And there's some very nice shortcuts, and all this has been there for a long time. It could be just to do a simple up to surface extrude, or it could be just to grab multiple geometries that you want to just do a copy surface, right? It could be there is seed and boundary, there are loop surface selection, or even sheet metal geometry. When you're doing sheet metal design, you might want to grab multiple edges quickly so that you're not doing one by one if you want to add multiple flanges there, right? So this is where I think this whole Control-Alt-Shift that I just created a PowerPoint for that is not seen being that utilized by many of the customers. So let me just switch to Creo real quick and kind of show you a few things of what I'm talking about. I don't think we had enough time last time to go over. So first of all, I'm going to open up a simple sheet metal part I have here, right? It's a simple planar wall I've created in here. Now, normally what you would do is you would go select the edge, and then you would do your flat wall or flange wall, right? So pretty straightforward. You do your flange wall, you grab the edge, you grab the edge, and that's easy, right? We all know that. Now, how about adding multiple ones together, right? I could hold down the shift key, and that gives me the surface loop. So if you see here, I'm holding down the shift key, and I've seen most of you may be aware, but many I've seen they do it separately, and then they kind of work with the corner seam and all that. I mean, there are options to control all that, right? You can control the corner treatment. You can see what type of corner treatment you want. It's all been there for a long time, but the key is there. Let me cancel out of that. Let me do it one more time. Is I select one edge, I hold down the shift key, I get the surface loop right there. That's the key, right? I hold on one, I can just always go one by one, right? This is one by one chain, right? I'm just doing a one by one and adding. How do I know it's not three entities, but it's one single chain? If I go to this one selected, right? And if you notice that if I double click on it, whenever in Creo, right? Even from back in the old Creo Engineer days, anything is selected, you double click on it, it should give you a listing of the item, and it clearly says it's a chain rather than, the other way. So if you had not done a chain, let's say that you have done one control key, and if I clicked on it, right, let me just deselect this guy here. Now I have three selected. And when I'm doing it this way, I'm selecting three entities, as you can see here, right? You don't want that. Rather than that, I want to just go grab all of them in one shot. I go select this, hold on the shift, and there's your surface loop, right? Way back in the days, all this used to be there as a menu-driven option, and nowadays it's all on the shift key, right? So I select that, and now I should be able to do a flange. As you can see, I'm not getting the flat wall, which makes sense. A flange wall acts as almost like a sweep, but not the flat wall, right? So that's why I'm able to do the flange wall, and I do the flange wall, there you go, it goes in one shot there, right? So then I can, of course, control my corner relief, I can control everything else, and of course do my little flat state, flat pattern preview, and all that good stuff, right? That's all there, in Creo 2, it's all there, right? I want to look at the blank size all in one go here, maybe even create a simplified rep of my flat state, right? All that is possible, but mainly that I want to just quickly go over that, just so that you know that you're able to do that. Let me just get out of this one here. Let me go open up a different model here. I want to show a few more examples on this, even a simple one, right? Even in solid modeling, right? So for example, let's say I'm going to make this change here, right? I've done this change in here, and it's a simple change. But let's say my design intent would be to have this guy go or grow as long as this one, right? Obviously, that's not there right now. And I know we could do an edit definition, and I could do that up to surface and all that. But I don't know if you've tried. Since the old Wildfire days, you were able to drag that and at the same time hold a shift and snap to it. So that's a nice little thing that I like, where as you're dragging those drag handles and you hold a shift and snap, it's technically doing the up to surface, as you can see here, or to selected, really, right? So again, I'm holding down the shift as I'm dragging it, snap, boom, done, right? So now when I make that change, it's a simple one, most of you know, right? Creo is all about design intent. There it is. When I make that change, it should update. I don't want unnecessarily 2 dimensions telling 11 and 11. It should be 11 typical in my 2D drawing. If you update that, it should update the other, right? That's the design intent here. Just to show you that where that shift could help in Creo, right? The holding down the shift and the controller, different options here. I'm going to go over a few more in here as we mainly for surface selection, right? Sometimes in surface selection, for example, if I go to go open up a different design here. As I'm selecting, I know that I can select control and I can just select surfaces, right? It's easy to select surfaces. I know it's not too complex, so I can hold control key and I've grabbed about 4 items here, as you can see, right? If I double click on that, it's 4 selected. But is there a quick way to select all items, right, based on a rule, like we call it seed and boundaries, anchor boundary, seed and boundary? That might be very, very handy, right? I've used it, for in FEA for creating fluid volume. I've used it even for sometimes even when you do drafts, or if you want to add collect geometries for dies or punches, right? Quickly, you want to select multiple geometries quickly. All you do is you select the surface, right? The seed, right? Right now it's one is selected, as you can see, but if you hold down the shift, select that, let go of the shift, and what it does is it essentially selects everything in between except the boundary. So using the shift, let me do that one more time, right? I can grab any of these guys, it doesn't matter, right? Any of these surfaces, like even that whole surface, doesn't matter. And then I hold the shift and I say, I want you to bound it here. So what it's doing, the system is doing is, it's going all the way from that seed to the boundary. And when I let go of the shift, it grabs everything in between. And if I go to my one selected here and see what it selected, you see that it is selected a seed and boundary. So why would this be useful? Maybe I want to do a copy paste here at this point. I do a Control-C, Control-V, I copied it. It could be for a variety of other reasons, but the quick geometry selection is the key, right? Can I bound it to multiple geometries, right? Yes, absolutely, you can do that too, right? I could just go select this, I could hold down the shift, and I could do this. And now, can you see here? I could do another shift and bound it here. So maybe I don't want it to flow on this side and use a control to grab this one, for example. So quick, now where could we potentially be using something like this, right? Where would be a use case, right, of where I could be using the seed and boundary selection is, I go back to my design here. Maybe I'll open up this, let's say it's a thin part here. I've cut it in half. I've done a symmetric cut doing some FEA, but this is the actual part, as you can see, and just for visualization purpose of, also for simulation, I've done a quarter cut here. My goal is to grab all these surfaces inside, right, really quickly, right? You can do intent surface. There are quite a few ways, but it might take forever to do this, or maybe I know I can do my rectangle select and I can do it, but it picks surface on the other side, right? I can do left drag, right drag, depending on if it's fully enclosing. All those options are available. It still takes some time. This is where that seed and boundary becomes very useful, right? I could grab any surface as my seed, and my boundary could be, I could just hold the shift key and say, that's one boundary, right? You see, it's picked everything at this point, even to the other side, because we still got to do a lot more bounds, right? I'm gonna go hold on the shift and bound it there. I'm essentially cutting off that, right? Really, so I'm gonna go shift and I'm gonna go bound it here. And there it is, right? So what we have right now is, it is pick everything inside, exit on the other side, right? So if I go to my one selected right in here, you see the seed and boundary surface. So maybe potentially this is where I might be applying my pressure load, or I might want to do an offset or what have you, right? There could be sort of use cases, but you get the idea, right? Where all these could be potentially be helpful. So going back to my some more examples on this, where this could be used. There are times where you might have these kind of surface models where I've done a boundary blend, as you can see here, and it's not too bad, it looks okay, but why did this happen, right? Why are these edges in here, right? If I go back in time here, we'll just go to insert mode and unhide some of these. This is a straight line, and this is made of, obviously, if I go do a quick redefine, I'm using Creo 7, by the way, that's why you see these constraints a little bit different, right? They got, in Creo 7, they have, if I go into options and if I go into entity display, they got an option to control the size of the constraint icons, the background color, line color, all that's new in Creo 7, but it still works the same as before. But you see how I have a line arc, and these are the entities, right? These are the vertices where those lines are created. That's why, it did do the blend, but could I just convert this into a composite curve, into one single curve that's curvature continuous, right? Again, that's where you could use a Control-C, Control-V. Copy paste could be used there, right? So for example, I could just go select that, do a copy paste. When I do a copy paste, you get an exact option and an approximate option. When I use the approximate, what it's doing is at those vertices, right, where the line and arc was here, there was another arc, at these vertices, the system is trying to make it curvature continuous too, right? So it's essentially a C2 surface there, or curve. And now I should be able to let me hide the original guy right there, the original one. And now if I do my boundary blend, right? Let me just do my little boundary blend and say from here to here. And you see it doesn't create that. I have my shaded with edges on, right? And I just don't see it. So several use cases of those. Let me just go out of this one here. Let me just go close like this. for the Control Alt Shift. I think, yeah, we'll get back to, we'll see if time permits, we'll take a look at it, a few more other examples later on. In assembly, we'll talk about where it could be used. But just overall, this holding down the Shift versus holding down the Control, it's a big difference, right? You're selecting multiple references versus a chain. That's the key. And we talked about how in the sketch also, this makes a difference, right? Holding down the Shift doesn't auto constrain, or it doesn't assume constraints, right? Temporarily, you're almost like removing the intent manager, right? Temporarily while sketching. And moving on to a few other topics that we didn't have time last time is the UDF, right? User-defined feature. Many of you may have used it. It's a really a good practice to reuse feature information from a template model into multiple designs, right? So it could be for sheet metal corner notches or punch, for holes. It could be even for this keyway geometry, as you can see here. In our company, we keep doing it often again and again. Why do we have to spend time recreating it every time? Just create a template model and create this group GPH file. That's something that admin could do just once. It'll remember the references that you used, and when you place them, it's just easy to go over that and place references. Now, you might think that it has a lot of references, so there's a workaround. You could use a coordinate system, like an on-surface coordinate systems like I've used here, where I've based off everything off the on-surface coordinate system. So when I place it in different designs, it's just easier to just place, select the placement references of the on-surface coordinate system, and then it takes it off from there, right? So it's very, very useful. And with Creo 7, we also, UDF is also supported in the bodies, right? Some of you may have been familiar with Creo 7, introducing the concept of bodies in one single part. So I could have this main body and the overmold body here. That could be done with UDF. So there are several use cases for UDF. So here's another use case here for an SAE port like this, right? With so many different dimensions I may have. I don't want to be doing this every time, creating a revolve feature, and it would be nice to have a UDF drive that port, right, for example. So let me just quickly go through a couple examples on UDFs before we move on to the next topics here. For example, if I go to, I'll open up this, Creo 7 model here. So what I've done here, if you look at the cross section here, is the main body. I have the overmold. Also, you can see the yellow body, right? They got two bodies in here. You see here, the housing and the overmold, right? Each could have its own material, right? That's all new in Creo 7. You're going to see bodies, right? In a single part, you could have multiple bodies, and there are several use cases. And we have done quite a few webinars on what's new in Creo 7 specifically, and you might want to check those out if you're new to this whole concept of body support in Creo 7. But how did this itself could be a UDF, right? So let me just get out of the cross section in here. If I go, so I'm basing it off of a coordinate system, right? I could just have a coordinate system that I've created here. And these are, I'm doing an extrude, I'm doing a subtract in here, like a Boolean subtract, doing a couple of rounds, and then that's kind of how I've done that, right? So if I want to create another UDF, so there's your UDF. The UDF is already done. I'll also show you how to create UDFs in a second here, but when I have my UDF, and if I go to, for example, let's see here, if I could go to my UDF, it's nothing but a GPH or a group file, right? And if your admin may have already put together, they might have a config.pro called progroupDAR. It would point to a folder either in Windchill library context or in your local folder if you're not using Windchill, and there will be a group folder there. I'm going to use this UDFs right now, and it'll ask you for references, and all I have here is a coordinate system, a couple of surfaces, and the two bodies, right? So as you can see in starting Creo 7, the bodies are also supported inside of the UDF. So for the coordinate system, I'm going to just go grab this guy here, right? And then for the surface, it's asking for the top surface in here, right? Whoever created the UDF, they were kind enough to make sure that they added some comments so it makes sense for the user that's placing it. There's the top surface, and now it's asking for the bottom surface. I'm just going to query select to the bottom surface, and the main body is this guy, and the overmold body is the one I want right there, right? So as you can see, again, there are different options. You can vary the size. You can have metric versus inch. There's quite a lot of options you can do. You can even vary family table, things like that when you do UDFs. But right now, you see how this UDF, it's a cutout in this case. And what it's really doing is there is a first extrude, right, based on the coordinate system, and then another extrude there, right? And this is where we are creating some rounds and everything, and this is where we're adding the next body, right? We can assign features to different bodies, right? It's contributing to this body or this body, right? I have a second body there. Now I have interference there, so I got to subtract that, and then finally subtract it so you don't have any interference. So if you look at my final my offset cross section here, there it is, right? And they can have different hatching styles, different materials, etc. Now, this is more for, now you might say that you probably are not using Creo 7, and what would be a use case for UDFs, right? So for example, I could go, let's see here, if I could open up a design like this, right? So maybe this is a mount geometry, or this is a geometry that I might want to place it in multiple parts quickly, right? So it looks like it's pretty straightforward, right? I have this template model here where I have a coordinate system. I got a few planes. I have this cylinder draft, got a few of the pattern, right, or the ribs. I did that as a rib. So, you know, why I did that as a rib, so it can conform to that geometry, right? We'll talk about ribs in a bit here. And then there's your hole that is done, right? A countersunk, you know, I can maybe change it later on. It's going to be a counter bore versus a countersink. You know, you can change all that when you place it, but that's maybe I'd like to have from here to here. This is what I'd like to have in my UDF, for example, right? I'd like to UDF that, right? If that's a word, right? So I'm going to take the role of an admin, or even any of you could do this, right? So our UDF library, you know, still uses the good old menu manager. Many of you might remember the done, return, done days, right, of the 90s, the Unix-based environment. It still uses that. I'm going to create a UDF. We'll just call it some name here. And you can either make it standalone, subordinate, dependent, or independent, and all that, right? Right now, I'm going to make it independent, right? I don't want to include the reference part. And it's asking for the features. Now, this is where the key is, where the reason for this coordinate system, this on-surface coordinate system, is that you could use that as your main reference when you're building this. So, for example, I go from that coordinate system to the hole. Those are the features I want. And now all it needs is the reference. It's asking for the prompts, right? I could say top surface or placement reference, for example, right? All I need really is the references. So I'm just going to go OK from all of this here. It asks for 3 references for that coordinate system. And it's also asking for the body, the reference color. That's the same body we want. That's good. And now that we support bodies, that's why it's asking. Now, when I place this, right, I've created the UDF, right? It says the UDF has been stored, and you could use the config.pro option pro group DAR to point. So anybody in the company, when they go, for example, you might be the user who's going to be using it. And if I go to, for example, a part like this, and I want to place a UDF, I go to my user-defined feature. And where does it go or look for, right? Now, I got quite a few of them done here, as you can see, right? And I could always go to my config, right? And give it a path for that. So that's under, if you go to, it's called a pro group DAR. And whoops, this is a typo, talking and typing. Just bear with me for a second here. And then you can point it to a folder. It could be in Windchill library context where you have all your GPH or group files, and you could have done that too. But I just have it in my folder here, just place that. And I'm able to place it, as you can see, it's just using the on-surface coordinate system, right? So there's my on-surface coordinate system, and I'm able to kind of place it across in here. There it goes. And I can go to my body, and then I can just select the body here. There it is, right? Could even be a different body, like with our ore mold example, but that's pretty much it. Right, I could even do a rotation if I have to, right? Or if you go to your on-surface coordinate system, I can add a rotation here, little drag handle where I can be able to rotate it, right? So I just quickly placed it, and I can even make changes to it, right? It's just a group. It'll be a group, and depending on how you did it, dependent or independent. Now it's independent. I can make changes here, right? So yeah, UDFs is very, very handy. Could be used across sheet metal parts, solid parts. Now with bodies are very, very, very useful. A few of the things that I've seen, some of the hidden things or things that many customers may not be aware of. the geometry pattern, right? I really like the power of geometry pattern, especially when it comes to performance with large assemblies and components that may take a while with your regular, regular pattern. It takes a while. So not sure if you've tried it for faster regeneration in Wildfire 4.0, right? Creo Engineer Wildfire 4.0, PTC introduced geometry pattern. So it's been a while, right? It's been there for a long time. It's not something new in Creo. This geometry pattern is pretty powerful where you're essentially selecting the geometry using one of those methods I may have shown you, right? The seed boundary or 1 by 1, etc. And then you could just say, I want you to pattern the geometry. Now, how is this different than a feature pattern? It's doing like a copy geom, and then it's almost like a surface quilt removal. It's taking less time to regenerate. If you think from a computational standpoint, it might help, right? Especially when you have very complex ones in there. So that's really nice. And then there are times where the geometry may need to be removed. I know we all like suppress, right? But you know the problem when you do suppress of a feature, it will also suppress the children. Is there a workaround to this? Maybe you got a step or an IGES file or a non-Creo file, or maybe you're the guy doing some analysis work and you'd like to get rid of geometry. The remove tool is a nice little workaround to quickly remove or fill that geometry, right? Shouldn't be used, I wouldn't say this is a best practice for modeling per se. It's more like an editing tool, right? You could do edit, remove, and I don't know, just wanted to show a couple of these before we move on to the next few topics here. I go to, for example, I'm going to open up that same design that I showed you. We'll just make it a little more longer. So maybe that should be good enough there. So yeah, normally, you know, what you would do is if you think about it, there's an extrude done. The way I did this, see, there's that guy there, right? You have the hole, did an extrude over there, and then I did this. And so in this, and then I did the, extrude. So I know I'll have to reorder before grouping because you can only group features and sequences. And I don't have to deal with those things when I'm doing a geometry pattern. All I have to do is not selecting the feature. I just use my seed, shift, select the boundary, let go the shift, and there you go, right? You have your seed and boundary selection that we just talked about, another application of it, right? You see double clicked on the selected items, it shows seed and boundary, right? Now, I could just select that geometry. So I know geometry is selected, you're not selecting the feature, and I can go to my pattern. And even though the pattern is grayed out, this is one reason many users may not have seen it, right? There is a drop down and you could go to geometry pattern. And when I do that little geometry pattern, and then, starting Creo 7, I really like how you have your mini toolbar fly out for dimensional, direction, axis, fill, all that. Remember, we used to go up here, right, back until Creo 6. So I strongly, recommend working in full screen mode. That's one of always my favorites ever since Creo 4 came out. So you're focusing on the design, right? You're going up, you're not going and figuring out where did PTC move the commands this time or things like that. Your just focus stays on your design, right? So there it is, right? I click on it. Even this is a config option. There's a config option to store, right, to automatically give these prompts, right, the help. Define the first direction, it says, right, effective direction. Before we had to go in here and see that, right? So again, if in full screen mode, I could right click and I could pin the status bar if I would like to see that, right? That's always an option. But my point is, yeah, right here, mini toolbar instead of the feature is one of the nice things in Creo 6, right? So I go to my direction and I say, that's my direction. And let's say we'll add going back to the point here, let's say we'll add about 5 of them in here. So what you're really getting out of here, if you see, it's really doing a pattern of a copy geom, right? That's like a local copy geom, essentially, right? So from a regeneration standpoint, I know this is not a very big model at all, but geometry pattern will help with file size and regeneration time, right? So, and then let me just go here. We'll just go back to non-full screen mode. Okay, so, and then also with the same example, the removal of geometry, right? That's also quite handy, right? Though, let's imagine this is a step for an IGES file, or I'm not able to suppress features because of the feature history, what have you. I'm able to quickly do the same thing like I did earlier, right? I do that shift drag to select all of that, and I can go to editing and simply remove, right? I'm not even using any add-on extensions like flexible modeling or anything. I mean, there are some additional capabilities with FMX, but this is just out of the box, straight out of the box in Creo base license. You're able to just say, okay, I want to remove that guy there. What it does, it fills it right there. Could I remove this one here, right? I have it in my mini toolbar. You can customize your mini toolbar, right? Right mouse click, search for the remove, and you should be able to just drag and drop it. I already have it in here, as you can see, right? And then it stays there in your mini toolbar. So I can go from here to and remove, and it removes it pretty much, right? So it's a feature that it's added, but it's essentially, if I suppress that, you see it's back on, for example, right? So that's a remove feature I was talking about. Going back to a few other things that I wanted to quickly go over is this rib. I think already we talked about a little bit on the part modeling side on the rib feature. It's a good practice to kind of take advantage of trajectory rib and profile rib as required instead of doing your extrudes and thin extrudes and whatnot. There are advantages. It can confirm to the size, right? That's the biggest advantage of doing these, right? The trajectory rib or the profile rib. It's been there since the Pro Engineer days, nothing new, but something that I've not seen a lot of customers aware of sometimes. A good percentage of the customers know about it, but I thought that would be another thing that you should try out, especially in intricate geometries like this. No need to do any complex quilting or surfacing or anything. All you do is you draw your path, right? That's it. And it knows to go to next, both sides right there, right? That's a rib feature. And another nice little thing, Intersect feature that I like personally is to create a 3D curve in Creo. You just have to have two 2D curves and you can get the 3D curve, right? It's something that's been there for a long time. Another one of those, I would say, not heavily used or underutilized feature maybe. So if I go to one of my designs here, right? There are several ways to do this, right? You might have sometimes like points, right? You can have you can import a point cloud from a CMM, for example, and create curves through that. There are several ways to do this. But in this case, right, I just wanted to throw in a quick, I'm not using piping or cabling or anything. I just wanted a quick sweep in here. And to create this, I probably have in this view, I have an idea of how it's going to look like. And I probably have in this view how it's going to look like, right? So that's kind of exactly what it's done here. So let me go back in time here. So I got two curves or two simple sketches here, spline-based or regular sketches, right? There's one sketch done in this plane, right? And I got another sketch done in this plane, right? So if I go redefine on this and go to my sketch view, I got two sketches in two different planes in here. Now, how do I get the compound or the intersect of this? Is I just hold the control key of these two and there's your intersect. So intersect is not just for intersecting a plane and a surface to get the curve. We can also do two curves actually. I'm not sure if some of you may have used it, but those are not. There's your intersect curve. It essentially give me the 3D curve. And what is it doing behind the scenes? If you think about it, it's probably extruding this guy. It's probably extruding the other one too, if I could extrude that, right? I mean, it's there it is. And it's giving you kind of like the inside, the intersection, and that's kind of what it's doing, right? You don't even have to do the actual surface itself. That's a 3D curve. And this is something you could obviously use it in your sweep and everything, right? You might want to just do, and there's your, you probably want to just do a quick sketch or something like that. There it goes, right? And there's your sweep there. But that 3D curve is something that I've not seen a lot of people use. And then even the rib feature, right? For example, if I go to, let's see here, maybe actually instead of showing this, let me better open up a real world design, kind of like real world-ish, I should say, something close to, right? A demo model I have here. So if I go to this one here, so the way I would create a rib through these geometries, right? Instead of doing thin extrudes or something, I could just use my trajectory rib, very, very useful, right? If I go to my trajectory rib and just select that sketch and give it a thickness of say 1 or something there it goes, right? So what is it doing? It's almost like a sweep trajectory. I laid out the path and I didn't even have to go all the way till the end. It knew to go to the next surface there. And I could even add, drafts, rounds, all in one go there, right? Very, very huge, you do injection molded parts, right? Maybe my plastic part modeling, it's one of the biggest advantages, you know, it was introduced again in the Wildfire days, nothing new here in Creo, been there for a while there. That's why I talked about the ribs that you could take advantage of. We talked about the blend earlier. Oh, one little thing here, you might have seen surfaces sometimes when you do surface modeling, you know, these control points having issues, right? I mean, wherein you'll have to tell the software to get rid of those geometries. It might have issues, obviously, from a manufacturing standpoint, or when you thicken or do a, you know, for downstream applications, going to have issues, right? So how do you, the way that you do is you go to control points and you fix it, but there's a nice little, better way than that. Sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very useful tool, you know. So if I go into one of these designs here, right, obviously let me just first do the boundary blend here real quick. Most of you may know the boundary blend, where again, you see I'm using the shift to grab the chain. I'm holding down the control to, and then now again, the shift, so it's a chain, right? They're all done as separate ones, that's why I'm doing this. So I'm going to hold the control key. I'm going to use my shift to, the reason I'm using the shift is I want to include that as a chain, right? I'm adding my third curve here. And I go to my control again, and I do my shift, and there it goes, right? There it goes. And I might go control again, and this is where I like to use a surface tangent loop right there. So it picked it up. And I go to my second direction. I'm going to say, hey, from here to here, and to here, right? That's what I might need in there, right? Let me just undo that second curve. I probably added a point in there, because you could also go to a vertex there. So there it goes, there it is, right? So if I go and reorder that right up there, I got it. So there's my simple blend in there, or surface blend, and I can add tangency, et cetera, right here. But my point here is, you know, if I do a little preview and go to my shading with edges here, you know, these issues in here, right? Normally you would go to control points and define your control points, but I don't know if you've tried the natural one in here, right? In the first direction, this is my first direction, this is my second direction. There's piece to piece. I don't know if you've, during my industry days, I've had a 50-50 luck with it, but I would always try that first, right? It's a nice little, if I go piece to piece, there are, depending on how the curves are done, as you can see, it has seemed to have automatically grabbed it rather than you going and defining it manually. You see that? That's a nice little one I thought some users may not be aware of. And just to move on, just I know as we are pretty close here, just a few other things generally that might help when you do assembly, right? When you're doing some assembly basic constraints. I really like this 3D notes that PTC had for a long time. Double clicking on them allows you to change the reference, change the type of the constraint very, very easily and quickly. That's very, very useful, right? You know, I double click on this coincident, for example, I could switch it to, I don't know, normal or coplane, what have you, or even flip the direction depending on the constraint type. I'm able to do that without having to go to the dashboard, right? Very, very nice option. And it's very easy. You know, many times we just select the wrong geometry, just double click, reselect it, you're all set, right? You don't have to go remove, add, etc. from the dashboard. And also, whenever you need to select hidden geometries, for example, I'm in the process of assembling and I'd like to select a datum plane, and that might be in a layer or hidden. I don't want to unhide all of them and select it. While assembling, you could use a search tool. Or it's kind of like the old school select by menu, very similar to that. But the advantage here is as I'm assembling this component, when I say look for planes, it could be hidden, right? It could be part of a layer. It'll show up here. It'll also highlight it, and then you could select it. It's a very nice little tool where you don't have to go pause, unhide, hide, etc. You could still search it, even though it's hidden, right? Some of the config options that I personally like, I'll just probably, we'll probably wrap up with this here as we're closing on time here. Some of the nice config options that I personally like when using assembly that you should try is auto constrain, always use offset, right? So have you seen many times, you know, if it gives you an actual offset value, even though you didn't want it, right? You could try setting that to never. You know, there's a few options like when you, for example, it might be within the accuracy, or I should say, depending on the size of your components, you may have it too far off before you selected the geometry or constraint type. It tries to assume things, right? That you want to have an angle, you want to have a normal, right? So automatic constraints can be controlled better with these constraints, right? There's even an angle, the epsilon angle EPS value that you should play with. Some of these are general things. I know it depends on your model size. As you know, every Creo component has a model size, but I would encourage you to try some of these too, right? So, and then one PTC constraint set parameter that I personally like is when you need to have your components in this position versus this position, right? How would you do that? Is you could set up this PTC constraint set that they introduced in Creo 2, very useful, wherein you could put it in your tree column, and then you can add multiple constraints, and you can enable or disable them, and you can call them or reference them using this constraint set. This is a system parameter, right, that you would add, and there it goes, right? You can quickly switch between each one of them. There's a lot of use cases here. I know I didn't want to demo this right now, but there's some good use cases I think that is introduced in Creo 2. Just finally wrapping up with a few other config options and settings that I like personally in assembly is component assemble start. Try setting that to move then place. What it does is when you bring in a component, it automatically puts your part to the mouse cursor. Very, very useful, right? I really like how when there are times that many times I've seen users spend a lot of time bringing in closer to the assembly, or maybe they use a secondary window, but if you set it to move then place, comp assemble start, it will automatically lock to your mouse cursor. You drop it, and if you had component interface, even better, right? You can even automatically assemble it. So yeah, some of those are some been there for a long time, nothing new. I also like seeing the constraints in my model tree. I always turn on the placement folder, right? Wherein I can really see what type of constraint it is. Is it a connection versus a constraint? It'll expand it. I turn all the features, obviously, when I see that. And some general things that most of you may be aware of, right? When you open an assembly, sometimes you see this black rectangle. Sometimes you see a rectangle with a dot, sometimes a pause, sometimes two rectangles. And what do they really mean, right? When you have a rectangle, it means it's packaged, right? Or it's partially constrained. But if you have a rectangle with a dot, it means it's connected. And if it's suppressed, as you all know, right, it's just a black box there. The frozen is no longer there. It's technically, failed now, starting Creo 3, but that's like a frozen, you just did like a freeze on the component and that'll show up there. And you might have attached a part to a component that's partially constrained. That's when you get those two rectangles or double boxes there. One other thing that I like, a few other settings generally in assembly, is if you go to your model tree settings and enable this pre-selection highlighting and show pop-up viewer, as you cursor over your tree, it will highlight in your main graphics window and also give you a little pop-up viewer, kind of like what it does in your thumbnail viewer for Creo view, very similar to that. And if you've tried that, you just turn that on, and it's a quick thing. Shouldn't take much time to show you that. If I open up an assembly in here, and if I just go to your, there is a pre-selection. There are configs for all of these again, right? Show pop-up viewer, and as I cursor over it, right, as you can see, it kind of highlights it. It also has this little large assembly. I know we could do a search, right? I could do a search in here, and it does a real-time search. All those are good things, but I like the pop-up viewer right there. That's another nice little setting that might help. And many times as you work in assembly, you're thinking, what are the different changes I've done in the last session? This is something the day-to-day usage of a Creo user. I've been there, right, where you're working on the assembly and you suppressed a few objects, you reordered, you restructured, you deleted, you created or assembled some components, and I'd like to have a color-coded view of what changes I did, right? So I don't know if you've tried that. You just right-click on your assembly and then go view changes or part, right? Right-click and view changes, and it will come up with this little dialog box, I should say, where it gives you, this is an old screenshot. It gives you color codes here, but it kind of tells you, okay, this blue component, these are modified ones, right? The spark plug is something I recently assembled or created there, etc. Right? So it kind of highlights it. That's under view changes, right? It's very helpful. It kind of helps you track the per session change, right? Obviously, if you save it, and check it in, you have the previous version to work with and go to review it. Or if you don't use Windchill, you have your .1, .2, etc. You can go look at it. But this is during the before I save, maybe I'd like to track what changes I did. Very helpful. It's one of those things that they introduce in Creo 2, might help. And the search tool too, right? I mean, search in Model 3 is always very, very helpful, I think. The packaged components, or you can search by are there family table generics, are there instances, kind of quickly highlight that in my tree. Very, very useful. Apart from typing in the part name, you can also do that, right? Very useful.
Probably wrap up, and it's 1:05 in case somebody needs to drop out, in case somebody has a question. I don't know if you want to check the chat.
Sure. Yeah, let's look at a chat. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I forgot about the time here. Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Deb. Yeah, let me see if are you able to, I don't know, let me just look at the chat window here. Let's see. There you go, okay. So let me look at the chat session. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in there. Yeah, I think we answered the favorites turn on and off different search paths. No, right, it's not owning, you don't turn on and off unless the result, the value of the config option is yes or no, right, that's it. And then Sketcher palette, can you default the scale to 1 instead of having it always import and random scale rate? That's a very good question. So what you're talking about is when you bring in from the Sketcher palette, you drag and drop. Actually, let's, what you're talking about is if I go to any sketch here, let me just make sure that I understand that correctly. If I go to my Sketcher palette, and it's just loading my palette here, right there it goes, right? So, and if I just go erase, drag and drop, you're asking about this scale is what I'm thinking, right? You know, and the scale of which it comes up. It really depends on your model size, your template, as well as you know, your datum plane size, right? And I know this is an existing model, right? So let's say, yeah. So the answer is yeah. I don't think there's a config for that. If you go to new part, right? Say, if you do a new part, this is more related to, right? So how do if I go to this plane and let's say I sketch a circle or something here, right? How do I know what size this circle is going to be, right? If I draw roughly to that plane, and why did it come up as 500 odd or some value there? The key reason for this will also hopefully answer a question actually, is the planes have a size in them, right? If you go to the front, edit def on that guy, and if you go to display, you see they're all locked to 508 by 508, and I think I pulled in an inch model or a metric, depending on the template there. And that's the reason, right? So if I go just outline, and if this had been, I don't know, 100 by 100, or I lock the aspect ratio here and say 100 by 100 in there, right? We'll just give it some, we'll just set it 100 by 100, and then we'll lock it right there. I could have a start part with those size, and then it will shrink, you know, it'll help you with that initial scale, but the scale that whenever you bring in sketches are always dependent on your default size, right? And it's obviously the planes, and control that. And you can also control it with a grid. You know, the sketch has a grid, and nobody uses grid these days, I know, but that's on the way. But yeah, this might help with your question there. Next thing, intent change. What are the rules when those are available? Yeah, that's a good question. So whenever I do for intent change, right, the rules are really, if I go create some random shape, you know, I'm just doing some what are my intent chains for this block in here is if I go to my round or something like that, right? If I go cursor over and say pick from list, you see my intent chain. It always picks up the edges, right, that are extruded. And there's also an intent chain of the actual, there it is, right? That's an intent chain. That's an intent chain. That's an intent chain. So I got 3 intent chains, as you can see here, right? So that's the rule. The rule is it picks up the shape that you sketched, the profile, and then the extruded edges. So when you make changes to these, right? So for example, I've done this in here, and I've given them, I'll just give it some value there. But when I go back to my my shape in here, and let's see if I could go quickly to this guy, maybe I delete this, right? Maybe I delete this and I just draw something else, something really, I don't know, we'll just, we'll see if it works or not, right? I just made up something else on the shape in here. I hit OK and complete out of it. And why didn't it fail this time is due to that intent, right? So it's that round, if you look at that, those three, they're picked as concepts, right? The concept is it picks up those extruded edges. These two picks up those shape edges, right? So the only time this is going to fail is if I had a circular extrude, these will fail because there's no edges to pick. But yeah, that's kind of, hopefully that answered your question on the rules them itself. Okay, for Lynn's question is, what is the most efficient way to revise a part with drawing to next revision? So I'm thinking, to revise a part with drawing to next revision. Are you talking on the Winchell side in here or on the Creo? I'm not totally 100% sure on that exact question there. And let's see, is it possible to add datum references to extracted bodies in the auto-generated external copy geom? Okay, let's see. Is it possible to add datum references to extracted bodies in the auto-generated external copy geom? Yeah, when you do an external copy geom, you are able to select datums, right? You're able to include datums, curves, and you're talking about, I know, the extracted body, like I showed you in that. Yeah, you should, because it's still, you're still allowed to select planes and axes, and as long as that body is in the main body, which it is, you should be able to select it. So much to see and absorb. Yeah, yeah, we can reverse it. Yeah, I know the goal was to, just sprinkle all of you with so many information as possible. So you can, the good thing is you can probably take a look at the recording, and I know there's so much we could go over. These are some general things that over the years I've seen, not, if some people are aware, some people are not aware, so I thought it might help. Okay, so let's see. Okay, there's a question. So without Winchell is what you're asking. To revise a part, yeah, you change the part, and with the drawing to the next yeah, so when you, what happened, let's see here, you revise a part with drawing. Okay, yeah, you have, so let's see here, I have a new drawing. We'll just create a new drawing for this part. We'll just reference some basic template I have here. There's my drawing, right? Let's see. Yeah, so and then you should have, if you have a parameter, right, you have a part parameter for the revision that would be called out in the drawing. And I don't have a title block or anything, you would have a parameter there, right? You should be able to modify that parameter because it's fully associated. The drawing is essentially driven off the part. So you should be able to do that, I think. I'm thinking, yeah, that's what you were asking about. Let's see, is there any other questions? Let's see. Let's see what I missed. Yep, looks like we're good. Deb, any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Oh, I think, yeah, like one of the people in the chat said, that there's a whole lot of information here that will be good to see back on the recording.
Sure.
And so after we hang up here, it will process in the cloud, and it takes 15 to 45 minutes to happen. And then we'll put it on our website, badgerug.com. You can also contact me at deborah.l.white@gmail.com, and I can send you the link. And then our Facebook and our LinkedIn groups for Badgerland User Group. But thank you so much. This was just jam-packed full of information. I loved it.
All right, thanks, Deb. Thank you all. Thanks for joining, and I hope all of you have a great rest of the day and happy weekend. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon in another presentation soon. Thanks.